Welcome to your deep dive. Looks like someone's ready to up their strategic thinking game. We've got a whole stack of stuff here, articles from HBR, some book excerpts.
Yeah, a lot of good material here.
So, what are we focusing on? Moving up that career ladder? Leading a team like a pro? Or just becoming a better decision maker overall? Whatever your goal, we're going to dig into all this and pull out the most valuable stuff, the stuff you can actually use.
Like a cheat sheet for strategic thinking.
Exactly.
You know, it's funny how many people think, oh, strategy, that's just for the higher-ups.
Yeah, like it's just for the executives in their fancy offices.
But honestly, thinking strategically is valuable no matter where you are in your career.
Right. It's like having a secret weapon.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the big picture, how everything connects, making choices that get real results.
Okay, so let's break it down a bit. One of the things we have here, the HBR Guide to Thinking Strategically, says it's not about coming up with these huge, complex plans.
Right, not just some big, dusty document that sits on a shelf.
Yeah, it's more about your everyday actions.
How they connect to the bigger goals.
Exactly. Like, how do the things you're doing today actually contribute to where you or your team or your whole company want to be down the line?
And that same guide talks about being both consistent and agile.
Which at first sounds a little like, wait, how could you be both of those things?
I know, right? But think about it like someone who's really good at their job, they're reliable, they consistently deliver,
So you know they're going to get the job done no matter what.
but they can also adapt when things change because let's be real, things change all the time. And being able to roll with those punches, that's agility. And it's super important these days.
Okay, so it's not just about like sticking to a rigid plan no matter what. It's about being able to adjust. So it's more like a strategic mindset.
Yeah, exactly. You got to be able to think strategically in any situation.
And speaking of adaptability, one of the book excerpts we've got dives into 6 essential skills for strategic leaders.
Oh, yeah, I was just looking at those.
It's by Seamaker, Krupp, and Howland.
Okay, yeah, I remember that one.
They've got this case study about Bob. He's a division president, super focused on his own area. But he's missing how his decisions are affecting other teams.
Classic siloed thinking.
Totally. And he has to learn to challenge his assumptions and collaborate better. It's a good reminder that even those at the top, they have blind spots too.
Absolutely. Everyone's got them.
So these 6 skills, they're anticipating, challenging, interpreting, deciding, aligning, and learning.
Yeah, and it's not enough to just know about them, it's putting them into practice every day.
Right, like walking the walk.
The authors describe this CEO who totally changed the company culture to be more experimental. So instead of hiding their failures, they created a system where people could take risks without fear and then analyze what worked and what didn't.
Wait, so they're actually encouraging people to try things, even if they might fail. That's so interesting. What did that look like in practice?
They set up a whole system for documenting the lessons learned from both the successes and the not-so-successes.
Like a database of failures you could learn from.
Yeah, something like that. And they changed how they rewarded people so that innovation and calculated risks were encouraged.
So if we're trying to level up our strategic thinking, it's not enough to just think we have these skills. We need to actually show them, right?
Exactly. Like you were saying before, walk the walk.
And the HBR Guide talks about this too. You can't just be strategic behind closed doors. People need to see it in action.
They have this example of Tim. Great at operations, but everyone overlooked him for leadership roles because he wasn't seen as a strategic thinker.
Poor Tim.
I know, right? But then he took the lead on this big, high-profile strategic project.
So he made sure everyone saw his skills in action.
Exactly. And it completely changed how people saw him.
So it's like, hey, look at what I can do.
Yeah, and it worked.
Okay, so let's say you are trying to show off those strategic thinking muscles. Don't you need to really understand your company's overall strategy first? Like, that's got to be the foundation, right?
100%. You can't be strategic if you don't know what you're being strategic for.
Right. You can't be aiming for a target you can't see.
The HBR Guide has a whole process for figuring that out. It starts with talking to people from different parts of the company, getting everyone's perspective.
So you're getting the full picture.
Exactly. And there's another article we have here. Strategy isn't what you say, it's what you do. It's by Roger Martin.
Okay, I like that title. Gets right to the point.
It argues that the real strategy of a company is what people are actually doing, not just some fancy words written down somewhere.
Right, because actions speak louder than words. It's like you can have a strategic plan up on the wall, but if everyone's doing their own thing,
then that plan isn't worth the paper it's printed on.
Exactly.
It makes me think about building a strategic network, which is another big theme in all this material.
Yes. There's a book excerpt that talks about that by Linda Hill and Kent Lineback.
Oh, yeah, that one's great.
They talk about a strategic network. And it's not just the people you work with every day. It's the folks who can give you a fresh perspective, who can see the trends emerging that you might be missing,
They call them outposts.
which is a pretty cool way to think about it.
It is, like they're stationed out there on the edge, seeing what's coming next.
Exactly. And you know what? Sometimes I get so stuck in the day-to-day that I forget to step back and look at the big picture. It's like tunnel vision. Any tips for avoiding that?
Have you ever noticed how when you're really stuck on a problem, you take a break, go for a walk, and suddenly the solution pops into your head?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
All the time. It's like magic.
It's like your brain needed that space to process everything. And there's an article by Rosabeth Moss Cantor, Zoom In, Zoom Out, that talks about this.
Okay, I love that title.
She compares it to adjusting a camera lens.
Okay. I see where you're going with this.
Sometimes you need to zoom in on the details, sometimes you need to zoom out to see the whole context.
So it's about consciously shifting your perspective, depending on what you need at that moment.
Exactly. Strategic thinking often requires that back and forth.
Okay, so we've got the zooming in, the zooming out, but how do we actually make decisions that align with the organization's strategy?
Right, because at some point, you got to make a call.
Exactly. The HBR Guide to Thinking Strategically has a ton of practical advice on this.
It does. It's a great resource.
One thing I noticed is how much they emphasize reflecting on your actions and choices. Leanne Davey wrote a piece on this, and she argues that even small decisions should be weighed against the organization's goals.
It's like constantly checking in with yourself. Is this taking us closer to where we want to be or further away?
That's a great question to ask. And it's probably a good habit to get into, right? Like, just make it part of your decision-making process.
Definitely. Make it a reflex.
But what about when you're juggling a million things at once?
Yeah.
You know, projects, deadlines, all that stuff. How do you even begin to prioritize? I'd love to hear what you think about that. I'm right there with you. Prioritizing is it's a constant struggle. But luckily, there are some smart folks out there who've come up with frameworks to help us out. One that really clicked for me is from Derek Leto in the HBR Guide. He says to think about your priorities in categories: critical, important, and desirable, not just a big, long to-do list.
Oh, yeah. That's way more helpful than just urgent or not urgent.
Right. I remember we touched on this earlier, but can you walk me through it again? Like, how do you actually use this in the real world?
So imagine a chart. On one side, you've got all your resources, time, people, money, whatever. Across the top, you've got all your projects or tasks. And then you slot each project into one of those categories. Critical those are the must-dos, no question. They need dedicated resources, clear deadlines, the whole 9 yards. Then you've got important stuff, still valuable, but maybe there's some wiggle room. And lastly, the desirables, the nice-to-haves, if you have the bandwidth.
So you're basically deciding where to put your energy based on what really matters for those big picture goals, instead of just reacting to whatever screams the loudest.
Exactly. It keeps you focused, make sure your efforts are actually moving things forward. But what about when the strategy itself is a little fuzzy?
Oh, tell me about it. It's hard enough to prioritize when you know exactly what you're aiming for. But when the strategy is vague or keeps changing,
It's like trying to hit a moving target.
exactly, you just end up spinning your wheels.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that kind of ambiguity?
That's a really good point, and it's something Lisa Lai tackles in the HBR Guide. She's got 3 strategies for dealing with strategic ambiguity: taking pragmatic action, staying emotionally steady, and tapping into your network.
Okay, I like that. It's like a toolkit for dealing with uncertainty.
Exactly.
Let's break those down a bit. What does taking pragmatic action actually mean?
It means focusing on what you can control, even when the big picture is blurry. Don't let uncertainty paralyze you. Find those short-term projects or initiatives that will make a difference no matter what the long-term strategy ends up being.
So find those areas where you can actually get stuff done, even if the overall direction is still evolving.
Hmm.
And I bet emotional steadiness is crucial too, because ambiguity can really mess with your head, right?
Oh, yeah. It's easy to get caught up in the what-ifs and start spiraling. Lai emphasizes the importance of emotional intelligence here.
Right, had to stay level-headed.
She recommends being proactive about getting information to reduce that uncertainty, acknowledging your own feelings and those of your team, keeping communication open and honest.
So acknowledge that it's tough, but we're all in this together.
Exactly.
And the third one, tapping into others' expertise. That feels like a natural extension of that.
It is. Sometimes the best way to deal with ambiguity is to reach out, talk to your network, your mentors, colleagues in other departments, even experts outside your company. Get different perspectives, advice. Remember, even the most seasoned leaders face uncertainty.
It's reassuring to hear that. It's like building a support system to help you navigate the unknown.
Exactly.
So let's switch gears a bit. I'm curious about your thoughts on decision-making frameworks. The HBR guide has this really detailed checklist for making better decisions faster. What are your thoughts on that kind of thing?
I'm a big fan of checklists. They help you stay on track, especially when things get hectic. And the one in the HBR guide is really good.
I was looking at it earlier. It's pretty comprehensive.
It walks you through 7 steps, starting with figuring out which existing company goals are relevant to your decision. That way, you're making sure your decision aligns with the big picture.
Right. You don't want to solve one problem just to create another one somewhere else.
Exactly. Then the checklist makes you come up with multiple options, not just jumping on the first idea. That helps you think outside the box a bit.
It's easy to get tunnel vision when you're under pressure.
Totally. So having that framework helps you see things more clearly.
What are some of the other steps?
Well, it also makes you think about who your decision will impact, the stakeholders and how. And it asks you to look at the potential risks for each option.
Right. So thinking about what could go wrong.
Exactly. What could go wrong? How likely is it? And I love that it reminds you to tap into your network for advice. Remember those outposts we were talking about? This is where they can really come in handy.
Like your strategic thinking brain trust.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've thought about the options, the risks, you've gotten advice. Then what?
Then you make the decision. And it's important to be able to explain your reasoning to others.
So be transparent about why you chose that path.
Exactly. And the last step is to evaluate the outcome of your decision. Did it work? What did you learn?
So you close the loop and use that to make even better decisions next time.
Exactly. It's a continuous process of learning and improving.
That's a really solid approach.
Yeah.
But what about those situations where you have to make decisions fast with limited information? I feel like that's a reality for a lot of us these days.
It is. Things move so quickly. And the HBR guide addresses that too. Tanya Menon and Lee Thompson have an article where they talk about the data diet approach.
A data diet. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
It's a 4-step process for turning data into something you can actually use, even when you don't have all the information.
So it's about making the most of what you do have.
The first step is to clearly define the problem.
Seems simple, but I bet we often jump into solutions before really understanding what the problem actually is.
It happens all the time. The second step is to take the information you do have and look for patterns and connections, things that might not be obvious at first glance.
So connect the dots, even if you don't have all the pieces.
Right. The third step is to experiment. Run some tests, get feedback, try different approaches.
So don't be afraid to try things out and gather more information as you go.
Exactly. And the last step is to set a deadline for making a decision. Time boxing helps prevent analysis paralysis and forces you to take action.
Right. Because sometimes you just got to move forward, even if you don't have all the answers.
Absolutely.
But let's shift gears for a second. Something I personally struggle with is communicating a vision or strategy to my team in a way that really resonates. I can explain the what and the how, but sometimes the why gets lost, and that makes it harder to get everyone on board.
That's a common challenge, and Kelly Decker and Ben Decker address it in their HBR Guide article. They recommend a 4-part framework for communicating a vision effectively.
Okay, lay it on me.
First, understand your listeners. Second, articulate your point of view. Third, outline the actions required. And fourth, explain how it benefits the team.
Okay, that seems pretty straightforward.
It is, and it works. So first, understanding your listeners. It's about knowing your audience, their priorities, what motivates them, how they process information.
Right, because everyone's different.
Yeah.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. Once you understand your audience, you can articulate your point of view in a way that resonates with them. Explain the why, the goals, the challenges. Be transparent.
And then make it super clear what actions they need to take, right?
Yes. What are the milestones, deadlines, metrics? Be crystal clear about what's expected.
So don't just talk about the big vision. Tell them how to actually get there.
Right.
But how do you make sure they're motivated to do it?
That's where explaining the benefits comes in. What's in it for them? How does this help them grow, learn, advance their careers?
Connect the strategy to their own personal goals. Love it.
It makes it real for them.
Okay, so you've communicated the strategy, you've outlined the actions, you've highlighted the benefits. How do you actually make sure everyone's rowing in the same direction and making it happen? Because there's a big difference between understanding a strategy and actually executing it.
You're absolutely right, and Paul Leinwan explores this in his HBR article. He argues that strategy execution is often more of a human behavior problem than a strategy problem.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's not just about having the right plan, it's about understanding the people involved.
Exactly. You need to understand what motivates people, how teams work, how your company culture influences things. It's about leadership, creating an environment where people feel empowered to do their best.
That makes a lot of sense. And it reminds me of another topic I wanted to discuss, aligning your team around those big picture goals. What are some strategies that have worked for you?
One framework I really like is the Big Arrow process. It was developed by Lindsay McGregor and Neil Doshi, and it focuses on finding and removing the obstacles that prevent teams from achieving their goals.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about this big arrow process.
So first, you define your wildly important goal, or WIG. This should be a specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goal that aligns with the overall company strategy.
So it's like that clear target you were talking about earlier.
Exactly. Then you figure out what behaviors will drive success towards that goal. What specific actions do people need to take consistently?
It's like defining the steps to reach that target.
Right. The third step is figuring out what's stopping people from consistently doing those things. Are there system problems? Not enough resources? Cultural barriers? Lack of motivation?
So you figure out what's blocking the path, what comes next.
Then you design interventions to address those root causes. Maybe you need to change processes, provide training, improve communication, adjust incentives.
You're removing those roadblocks.
Exactly. And finally, you track your progress and make adjustments along the way. Monitor how your team is doing, get feedback, and be willing to change things up as needed.
So it's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. It's an ongoing process.
Absolutely. And it really highlights that strategy execution is about so much more than just a plan. It's about understanding the human side of things, being able to adapt, and creating an environment where people feel empowered and motivated.
This has been incredibly insightful. I have a much clearer picture of how to approach strategy execution from a more, I guess, holistic perspective.
I'm glad to hear that.
But I also want to acknowledge that it can feel kind of overwhelming. There's so much to think about.
It is a lot to take in.
Do you have any advice for listeners who might be feeling a little intimidated by all of this?
It is a lot, and it's okay to not have all the answers right away. It's a journey, you know?
Right, it's not like you can just flip a switch and suddenly become a strategic mastermind.
Exactly. The best way to learn is to just dive in and start trying things out, see what works for you, for your company.
So experiment, learn as you go. That makes me feel better. But I'm sure there are some common roadblocks people hit along the way.
Oh, definitely. One of the biggest ones, and we see this over and over in the material we've been looking at, is just lack of time.
Ooh, yes. Tell me about it.
Everyone's so busy with the day-to-day stuff that they feel like they don't have the mental space to think strategically.
It's like you're constantly putting out fires.
Right.
When are you supposed to stop and think about the big picture?
It's tough. Ron Ashkenas wrote an article, Thinking Long-Term in a Short-Term Economy, and he talks about this.
Interesting title.
He says that even in the craziest environments, you have to carve out time for strategic thinking.
So make it a priority, a non-negotiable. Like, schedule a meeting with yourself for strategic thinking and don't let anything get in the way.
Exactly. Treat it like any other important meeting. Because it is important.
It'll pay off in the long run, right?
Absolutely. Better decisions, more clarity, better performance overall.
Makes sense. But sometimes it's not just a time issue, it's a mindset thing too.
Yeah.
Like, I've definitely felt like, wait, am I even wired for this strategic thinking stuff?
I know what you mean. I think sometimes it's because of how we're taught, how we're trained. We're taught to just get things done, follow instructions, be efficient. But strategic thinking is a whole different set of skills.
Right, it's like a different way of thinking.
Systems thinking, critical analysis, creative problem solving.
So you have to actively develop those skills, challenge your old habits, get out of your comfort zone.
Exactly. It's like learning a new language.
And there are resources out there to help you do that,
There are
right?
tons. The HBR guide has a bunch of tips and exercises, and there are so many books, articles, workshops, even online courses.
So it's really about taking that first step, making the commitment to learn and grow. But even if you find the time and you work on your mindset, there's still that fear of failure, right?
Yeah. That's a big one.
Because strategic thinking often means taking risks experimenting, putting yourself out there.
And that can feel scary, especially if you're in an environment where mistakes are punished.
It's much easier to just stick to what you know, play it safe.
It is. But if you let that fear control you, you'll never reach your full potential.
So how do you deal with that?
You have to reframe failure. See it as valuable data, a chance to learn and get better.
So it's a stepping stone, not a roadblock. But that shift in mindset, that needs to happen on an organizational level too, right?
100%. We need to create cultures where it's okay to experiment, where mistakes are seen as learning opportunities, where people feel safe to take risks.
And that starts at the top with the leaders.
Exactly. Leaders need to set the example. Be open to new ideas, admit their own mistakes, create a safe space for others to do the same.
I'm starting to see how all of this ties together. Strategic thinking isn't just about being smart or having a fancy plan.
It's about having the right mindset, building the right skills, and being in the right environment.
Exactly. It's the whole package.
And it makes me think about the future of strategic thinking. The world is changing so fast, the way we approach strategy needs to change too.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing on the horizon?
Well, one thing that keeps coming up is just the sheer speed of change. Everything's moving faster than ever before, which means we need to be even more agile in our strategic thinking.
Right. We can't get stuck in those old, slow ways of doing things.
Those big 5-year plans that are outdated a year later. We need to be able to pivot, adjust on the fly.
So it's like we need to be strategic sprinters, not marathon runners.
Exactly. Always ready to change direction. Another big trend is the importance of data and analytics.
Yeah, we have so much data available these days.
But it's not enough to just have the data. You have to understand it, be able to pull insights from it.
Right, because I can look at a spreadsheet full of numbers all day long, but if I don't know what it means,
It's useless. Data literacy is becoming essential for strategic thinkers. You have to see the stories that the data is telling you.
like you're a data detective.
Exactly. But it's not just about analyzing the data. It's about communicating those insights to others.
So you can tell a story with the data, a story that makes people want to take action.
Exactly. But even with all this talk about technology and data, it's important to remember that human skills are still crucial.
Right. At the end of the day, we're still humans making decisions.
And those decisions are shaped by our values, our experiences, our understanding of the world.
So it's about finding that balance between the tech stuff and the human stuff.
Exactly. And that's what makes the future of strategic thinking so exciting. It's constantly evolving, and it requires us to bring our whole selves to the table.
I love that. Our whole selves, our analytical minds, our creativity, our empathy.
Everything.
This has been amazing. We've gone from the basics of strategic thinking all the way to the future. I feel like I've learned so much.
Me too. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights and guiding us through this deep dive.
My pleasure. And remember, the most important thing is to take action. Don't let all this information overwhelm you. Start small, experiment, don't be afraid to fail, and keep learning.
Great advice. And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey. We hope you found it valuable and inspiring. Until next time, keep those strategic minds working.